Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's begin today's session of the comprehensive news analysis with the first article that focuses on a controversial and a much discussed bill that was recently introduced in the parliament by the government. That is the Criminal Procedure Identification Bill of 2022. Now, in short, this bill is trying to change a law that has been in force in India for over 100 years. That is the Identification of Prisoners Act of 1920. The opposition parties and the people who are outside the government are criticizing the bill on the point that this is a violation of the privacy of not just people who are convicted of a crime, but also ordinary people who have not been convicted of any serious crime. Now, in very short, the entire controversy of this bill is about the word measurements. Let me try and explain to you in very simple terms. Now, let's say that there is a person who has been awarded a 2-year or 3-year jail term. Now, when this person goes to the jail, this person's biometric data will be collected. For example, the retina scan, for example, facial recognition and other type of biometric data of that particular person will be collected, and it will be stored with the government servers for at least 75 years. Now, this is where the problem starts. Many people are saying that giving this unlimited power to the government agencies to collect all this private data of the people and store it with the government servers for 75 years is a violation of their privacy. Not just this law will even be applicable to those people who have been under preventive detention. So even if you have not committed a crime, you're under preventive detention. Even in that case, the government will take your measurements and the government has the power to utilize that. This is where the entire problem lies. That is, the authors here are making a point that this is a gross violation of right to privacy, which the Supreme Court also has said is a part of your fundamental right itself in the famous Aadhaar case. Now, let's go back to the arguments given in the article. The authors here say that back in the 1980s itself, there was a Law Commission report and a Supreme Court judgment in the case called State of UP versus Ram Babu Mishra case, in which the suggestion was that the existing 1920 law must change because it does not give a lot of powers to the agencies to make a database of the criminals and to use it to identify them later on. So there has been a demand of changing the existing law. But now the new law that has been introduced has a problem with the definition of the word measurements. The authors here point out 3 major issues in the bill. The first issue is basically that the word measurement is not just restricted to taking the measurements of the person. In fact, it is also the analysis of those data that the government will be collecting. The government will collect the iris and the retina scan, physical, biological samples of the analysis, even behavioral attributes including signatures, etc. Meaning that the government is giving itself the right to use and synthesize that data in whatever way that they want. In fact, even today, there are a lot of states and union territories in India that use facial recognition technology to identify those people from random crowds that they think are criminals or are repeat offenders. This is called as smart policing. Now, on paper, this technology might look good that government is using smart policing to identify people from the crowd just by using their facial recognition technology. But just imagine how easily can this technology be misused. Do you think the camera would always identify the correct person by matching his or her face with someone else? Not 100% times. What happens at the time when a wrong person has been identified as a criminal by the police? This smart policing means mass surveillance. Government will be looking at each and every ordinary individual, and there can be bias against those people which have been speaking against the government. The second issue that the authors are pointing out is who exactly can collect these measurements. The existing law says that data can be collected from a person who has been convicted or arrested for offense punishable with a minimum of 1 year of imprisonment. But now the new law has expanded it to say all the people who are placed under arrest. Means, for example, let's say you're not wearing a mask at a public place and you are arrested for 2 days or 3 days as a punishment because you may be a repeat offender. Even you will be covered under this. Or let's say that you are driving or you committed an accident, or maybe you broke a traffic rule and you were not able to pay the challan price and you may be arrested. In that case also the law would apply to you. So basically any person being arrested by the police for any case, even the most smallest of matters, will be covered under this case. Third, the database of the measurements which are being gathered are also under questions. The National Crime Record Bureau, that is the NCRB, will store this data for at least 75 years in a digital form. Now, this is being stored so that we can prevent, detect, or investigate matters in these offences at a later date as well. Meaning that the government of India is giving the power for this data to be utilized by the agency in absolutely whatever manner that they want. We should also know that even today, the National Crime Record Bureau does maintain a central database which is called the Crime and Criminal Tracking Network System without any specific law backing it. So they already have this kind of a data with them of hardened criminals. The authors point out that already there are multiple states that use their own kind of application to create a database. Like Rajasthan has a Raj Corp application which integrates with analytics capabilities in real time with multiple data sources. Punjab also has a system called PAIS, which uses machine learning, deep learning for facial recognition and identification of criminals. The problem in all these systems is that there is a good chance of this system going bad or giving a wrong result, as a result of which a person who is not even involved in such crimes would end up behind the bars without any remedy in sight. We have seen in the past how these initiatives are specifically used or misused against those communities which are already vulnerable. For example, there is a big caste bias against the Pardi Adivasi community, which were once designated as criminal tribe. Now, this kind of a designation had started at the time of the British, and unfortunately, even after independence, many Indian governments also identified certain tribes as criminal tribes. Now, when this kind of a bias is a part of our system, this kind of a bill will make situation even worse. As I said earlier, the Supreme Court of India itself had said that right to privacy is a part of your fundamental right. So how can the government violate that fundamental right so easily just by bringing in a new law? Just to give you a gist of the provision in the new law, the bill, as I said, will repeal the 1920 Act, which was limited to just recording fingerprints and footprints of the people who are convicted, and that too only in certain cases. The bill expands the scope of the word measurements and includes many other things now. The record will be maintained for 75 years and it would also be applicable to people who are under preventive detention. The one other point that was not mentioned in the article is that if a person without any criminal background is released without a trial or is acquitted by the court, then all the records of these measurements shall have to be destroyed. So if there's a case made out against you, but the court said no, you're not guilty, then all your records will have to be destroyed and it will not be a part of that database anymore. One other important point about the provisions of this bill is that this bill violates Article 20 subsection 3 of the Constitution, which says that no individual can be forced to be a witness against himself in the court of law. Now, because the person is being forced to give away the biological information, which could also lead to narco-analysis or brain mapping, this seems to be a clear violation of Article number 20, which is a fundamental right given to us. Many people suggest that this law will not hold the test of court and the Supreme Court should strike it down because there seems to be a violation of the Supreme Court judgments in the past, including the A.K. Gopalan case, the Khadak Singh case, the Charles Shobraj case and the Sheila Barsay case, in which the Supreme Court had said that the person who is convicted of a crime or is arrested does not surrender his or her fundamental rights and their rights still remain intact. The next article focuses on India-Nepal relations in view of Nepal Prime Minister's visit to India. This will be his first bilateral visit abroad after he came to power in July 2021. Now, this is no secret that India-Nepal relations in the past 7 or 8 years or so have not been great. All of this started with the supposed Indian blockade in September 2015, where Indian trucks did not enter Nepal. The Indian side maintained that there were protesters on the Nepal border and Indian trucks carrying food, oil, milk, etc. were not allowed to enter Nepal. Nepal, on the other hand, said that the Indian government was unhappy with the new Nepalese constitution and that is why the Indian government artificially created that blockade. Any which way that you take it, the fact remains that the relationship between the two sides has not been great since September 2015. Nepal Parliament also, on the other hand, has been dysfunctional since July 2020. Since the government that is ruling over Nepal is kind of a rainbow coalition with multiple political parties coming together and not being able to decide on one long-term leader. There were also some small incidents that added fuel to this fire. For example, after India demonetized its higher notes, that is 500 and 1000 rupees notes, the Nepal Rashtra Bank had asked the Indian government to replace 7 crore worth old notes, which the Indian government refused because that was past the deadline and we did not want this provision to be misused. Nepal did not take it well. Also, if you remember the history of flight IC-814, that was a flight of the Indian Airlines that took off from Kathmandu and was hijacked midway and was taken to Kabul, which eventually forced India to release multiple deadly terrorists. Since then, any passenger boarding flight from Nepal to India are subject to pre-boarding security check even after 20 years of that incident being passed, because Indian government says that we do not really trust the security arrangements at the Nepal airport and we have already bear the brunt of that. All that is despite the fact that there are still thousands of Nepali citizens who are working in the Indian army. That is why there is a big surprise amongst many experts. How come two nations sharing the same history, culture, society, even the same people in the armed forces can have differences between them at such a large scale? And it is expected that this visit of Nepal Prime Minister to India might help resolve those matters. Now, if you look at it from Nepal's point of view, Nepal also is in a very difficult position, with the country being in focus with respect to China, India, and even the US that has entered the phrase. Now, what is the US doing in Nepal? As you would have remembered recently, US had offered a $500 million assistance to Nepal under the Millennium Challenge Corporation. The Nepal parliament was happy with this and they ratified this so that they can receive this particular grant. China, on the other hand, was not happy because they thought that Nepal is becoming a sphere of their influence and any investment from the US is not welcomed here. Since then, there has been a kind of an uneasy relationship between Nepal and China, Nepal and US also, and Nepal and India as well. Now, it is interesting how India reacted to this. India remained silent on this issue of the US government offering a $500 million grant to Nepal. Now, this grant mainly will be used for power generation in Nepal. India, on its stand, did not really oppose this, while India, in fact, also offered an alternative to the MCC if Nepal wants to reject this aid, but Nepal was more than happy to accept this aid. Now, why is India behaving so weirdly? See, India, ever since our independence, has always seen Nepal as a younger brother. So much so that many a times you can even accuse India of taking Nepal for granted, thinking that Nepal would never do anything that goes against Indian interest. We have not given a lot of attention to Nepal's own problems as much as we should have done, because we always assume that they will always come to us whenever they needed some assistance. And now that we are seeing nations such as China, US coming into our own backyard and forming relationship with Nepal, India seems to be a bit uneasy with that. As far as Nepal is concerned, their Prime Minister's visit has multiple priorities. First, the two sides should have a power trade agreement between the two sides, which will only be possible if India can build trust in Nepal. So the point is that in Nepal, there are thousands of rivers, because of which Nepal has a great potential of generating hydroelectric power. But the problem is that a lot of barrages and small canals have been built by India. That is why many experts say that India controls a lot of hydroelectric power generation capacity of Nepal. Now, it will be in the interest of India also if Nepal produces hydrological electricity and India can import that. Because the fact is that while India is setting up new renewable power projects such as solar, wind, etc., but there is no substitute to the amount of electricity that we can get from hydropower. India's peak demand for electricity can only be managed by hydropower. So buying power from Nepal can be a good way out for India as well. So there has to be an agreement on both the sides about the power sharing and power supply. The second priority is that the sale of goods and payments between the two sides should be shifted to electronic platforms, and this can improve the trade between the two sides. Third, the two sides had already signed the bilateral investment promotion and protection agreement. However, there are allegations that whenever an Indian foreign investment goes into Nepal, it is not welcomed. And in fact, there are roadblocks being placed. That is why there is an expectation from the Indian side that the Nepalese government will try to fight against their cartels and trade associations and allow foreign investments from India. The positive development, on the other hand, is that Nepal recently has appointed a new ambassador to India, that is Mr. Shankar Sharma, who is a well-known economist in the country of Nepal. Earlier, he was Nepal's ambassador to the US and did a great job in improving their relation. So maybe the time to come would see India and Nepal coming much closer and having much better trade relations in view of the current developments. Now, since this article makes a mention of the Millennium Challenge Corporation, let me tell you what exactly is this and why is it connected to Nepal. Now, this was founded in 2004 as a US foreign aid agency. In other words, the US government tries to help some other governments who have displayed good governance, economic freedom, and citizen investment. So, this is a kind of a way in which the US government rewards and donates money or grant to foreign governments when they display good behavior. Their main purpose is to decrease poverty via economic growth in foreign nations. Now, usually there are two kind of programs that are run by the MCC, that is the Millennium Challenge Corporation. These programs are Compact Program and the Threshold Program. The Compact programs are the ones which are large scale. There is a 5-year grant that is given, while threshold programs are the ones where a small scale grant is given for a one-off purpose. Now, with respect to Nepal specifically, this is not the first time that MCC has given a grant to Nepal. Their first grant, in fact, was in 2011, which was a threshold grant that is for a small scale project. But then in December 2014, they decided to give a larger compact grant to Nepal. So an offer was made from the US side of committing $500 million to Nepal, which was expected to generate electricity infrastructure in Nepal. Electricity that could be used in Nepal also, and it could then be exported to India as well. Although there were many critics of the project that said that this is an effort by India, India has lobbied through US because India wants to use all this electricity and they will not allow any electricity to be used domestically in Nepal. But that is not true till now because that project has not started. So we are not sure whether or not all the electricity will come to India only or Nepal would also use a part of that electricity. As we discussed, the latest update is it has been ratified by the Nepali parliament. Although it took a lot of effort from the Prime Minister of Nepal to convince their parliament because the power producing companies in Nepal were seeing huge losses every year, and this agreement can be a way forward for them to turn profitable in the coming years. The next article that we have is focused on fuel pricing policy. Now, this is an interview taken from two established people who know in and out about the fuel industry in India. Now, in very simple terms, the focus of this article is that in the past, the Indian governments have always tried to subsidize petroleum products in India, be it the LPG, be it petrol, be it diesel, etc. But since the beginning of the 21st century, the governments have tried to deregulate it, meaning that the governments have tried to pass on the international rate to the end consumer in India without giving any subsidy support in between. The authors here are discussing whether this is the way to go ahead or should the government come in and start the petroleum and diesel subsidy again if we have to improve our economic growth. The article says that the history of deregulating oil and petrol prices goes back to the Nirmal Singh Committee of 1996. That said that oil pricing should be dismantled, that is, the government should not interfere, and the oil agencies should be allowed to set up their prices according to the global levels. While this started gradually from 1997 itself, the aim was that by 2002, the government will withdraw itself from the oil prices. Now, it did not happen completely in 2002, but at present time, we are in a much deregulated situation as compared to a couple of decades ago. Now, this was possible because if you look at the first decade of the 21st century, the global oil prices were not very high. For example, in 2006, the global oil price was $48 a barrel. That allowed the government to step back and not give any subsidy to the people of India and ask them to pay the market price. However, as the prices started to increase and touch $143 per barrel in 2008, the government had to come in and start subsidizing the fuel once again. The government mainly subsidized diesel, LPG and kerosene, understanding that the consumer might not be able to pay such a high price. This led to the government issuing a lot of oil bonds also of about 1.42 lakh crore. But when the oil prices started to drop, that is in 2015 when they reached $50 a barrel, this again allowed the government to step back and reduce its subsidy and rather increase their excise duty to earn more money. And this is what happened in that era. When the Modi government came in, they not only increased the excise duty on the petroleum products, they also took back any subsidy that was to be given to the petroleum products so that the government's expense does not become very high. Now, the problem is that in India, the government does not really stick to one single policy. For example, when the assembly polls were going on in the 5 states, you would have seen that the global oil prices were increasing, but the government did not increase the price. The government, in fact, took on all the losses because the elections were near. Now, this does not augur well for governance because you cannot keep on changing your policy depending upon how near or how far are the elections. You have to understand that irrespective of elections, you have to follow the same policy. So right now we are in a situation where the government took a lot of losses, means subsidized the losses of the oil companies just because the elections were near. And now that the elections are over and there's no election that is coming very soon, the government is again going back to the market price formula. However, the authors are saying that the government cannot now afford to go back to 100% market formula. Why? They are saying that we are in a situation where the COVID-19 recovery has not happened 100%. We are in a situation where consumption of people has not increased and the economic recovery is still very, very slow. Thus, the government must artificially interfere in the oil prices for some time. Now, the question is, if that is the case, who will take the burden? The central government or the state government? While the central government imposes excise duty on these fuel, the state governments, on the other hand, take VAT from these fuels. So both the governments are earning their own share of money from these fuel products. While the one option with the government is to cut down on these taxes, the problem is that that will reduce their earning, which they do not want. They have anyways cut down on corporate income tax in the past few years, and the GST collection also has not increased as much as the government would have liked. And that is why the government cannot afford to reduce one more source of earning by cutting down on their excise duty from the petroleum products. In fact, in the past few years, the government has considerably increased its earning from fuel. Petroleum sector earned the government about 1,72,000 crore in 2014-15, which went up to 4.5 lakh crore due to the higher excise duty that the government had put in on petroleum products. Today, the excise on petrol is about 29 rupees a litre and about 23 to 24 rupees per litre on diesel. So if the government really wants not to pressurize the common citizens of India, they have to find a way out and cut down on this duty and see from where exactly can they reduce their expenditure to maintain within the fiscal deficit target. Now, this article and even before this article, many government announcements had blamed the concept of oil bonds by the previous government for the problematic situation in the petroleum sector. The BJP government kept on saying that the previous government gave so many oil bonds to oil companies that we are still paying that back and it is affecting our economy. So let's see what exactly are these oil bonds and do they really impact the government's expenditure. As the name suggests, oil bonds are actually securities given by the government to oil marketing companies. Rather than the government giving them cash, government gives them oil bond. For example, if Bharat Petroleum has a cost of let's say 80 rupees per litre of petrol, the government will ask them, please sell it to the people at 70 rupees only. Whatever your losses are in between, that is, let's say 10 rupees per litre, we will give it to you. Government can either give it to them in cash or the government can give them in the form of oil bond. Oil bond means we are not giving any cash to you right now. We will give you cash after 20 years with an interest rate as well. This is called the oil bond. The governments do this mainly because the government try to delay their burden of such a payout. So rather than giving the money today, the government thinks we'll have to give it after 10 years, 15 years, there'll be a new government, let them decide, let them handle how to do this. We are not going to give this money. So it's a very common practice of issuing bonds, which is a kind of a burden shifted on the future governments. As I said earlier, the government since the beginning of the 21st century has tried to deregulate the fuel prices. In 2002, aviation turbine fuel, then petrol in 2010, diesel in 2014, all have been deregulated. Meaning that the oil companies, that is Indian Oil, Hindustan Petroleum, Bharat Petroleum, all have been given the freedom to fix their own oil prices and their profits. But the government does step in between, especially when the elections are near, as we have seen. Also, is it fair to blame only the last UPA government for giving these oil bonds, or is it a practice that is followed by multiple governments? Now, this is a practice that is followed by other governments also, just that they do it in different sectors. The UPA government, apart from giving oil bonds, they also gave fertilizer bonds to fertilizer companies as a way of giving a subsidy indirectly. Similarly, the present government has issued bank recapitalization bonds, specifically to infuse larger capital in the public sector banks without showing it as a part of the budget. So it's not a practice that only one government has done in the past. It's a very common practice depending upon what is the requirement of the present government. The next article that we have focuses on the old pension scheme that has been reintroduced recently in Rajasthan and also in Chhattisgarh. Now, the news is that on 23rd of February, Rajasthan Chief Minister announced that he is bringing back the old pension scheme. Chhattisgarh government also announced the same. They said that we will be bringing back the defined pension benefit scheme, which is the same as the old pension scheme. The trade unions across the country have been demanding that we want this old pension scheme to come back across the country, and they even called a 2-day strike. What about the union government? The union government is saying that that is not possible. Old pension scheme is financially untenable and it had put a lot of financial stress on the central government. Rather than that, the central government wants to continue with the new pension scheme or the national pension system. Now, let me tell you in very brief the difference between the old pension scheme and the new pension scheme. So, the old pension scheme is that government scheme that was running till 2004. That scheme was that after a government employee retires, they will be given a pension till their lifetime. The pension will usually be 50% of their last salary. That was the old pension scheme, in which the person who is getting the pension, he did not have to contribute anything. The government had to bear all the expenditure 100%. The new pension scheme, however, is that now central government employees have to give a part of their salary to the government. The government will also give the same part that will be invested in the market, and that will make the pension fund. So, for example, if I am a government employee and my last salary was 50,000 rupees, under old pension scheme, I will get a 25,000 pension and I will not have to pay anything for it. Under new pension scheme, for example, if I have 50,000 salary, a small part of my salary will be deducted. Let's assume 1,000 rupees will be deducted. It will go to the new pension system. The government will also contribute 1,000 rupees on my behalf. This 2,000 rupee will be invested in the market, and once I retire, I will be given money from this fund. So the difference mainly is that in the new pension scheme, the employee also has to contribute a part of the money. That is why the trade unions are not happy with this. The national pension system, or the new pension scheme as you call it, came into being when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister in 2003. It started in 2004 for all central government employees except the people in the armed forces. Now, the contribution that the employee makes in the pension scheme is matched by the government. An equal amount of money is given by the government. The money that you accumulate in your pension fund, you can withdraw 60% of it at a single point of time when you retire, which will be tax free, and the other 40% will be invested in annuities. Annuities means that you will get a sum every year. Let's say every year you will get 50,000 rupees as pension. That is called annuities. So 60% of the fund can be withdrawn altogether at one time. 40% will be in parts year after year. That is a new pension scheme. It is compulsory for all the central government employees. Private individuals can also opt for the scheme. So it is open to everyone. Just that for private individuals who work in private organizations, it is optional for them. The government has also introduced changes in this. In 2019, the government said that central government employees can decide who will invest their money of the pension scheme. By default, the money will be invested by LIC Pension Fund Limited, SBI Pension Fund Limited, etc. But if you want, you can change that as well, and you can decide how your money will be invested. Because it is a long-term investment, the government says that despite volatility in the market, the government is 100% sure that this investment will give decent returns to the people. So the people should be happy rather than protesting against the NPS system. Now, as I said, the main difference between the old and the new pension scheme is contribution from the side of the employee or not. There were reports in the beginning of 2000 that the government's pension expenditure is going out of limit and the government has to do something about it. That is when the National Pension Scheme, or the NPS, was introduced, so that the government can take a part of this pension from the employee himself. That is what the trade unions are demanding right now. If you actually look at the news closely, it is the Congress-ruled governments only that are bringing back the old pension scheme. Rajasthan did it. Chhattisgarh is also announcing it. So they are trying to put the pressure on the BJP to bring it at the national level also. But the BJP has announced it multiple times that they have no plans to reintroduce the old pension scheme because of the financial burden that it has imposed. The next article is about the rise of the Russian ruble. a topic that we did discuss briefly in yesterday's daily quiz also. This article says that despite a series of sanctions being imposed on Russia after the Ukraine invasion, the Russian currency, that is the Russian ruble, has bounced back extremely impressively. In fact, it has bounced back to the level of pre-war times. So for instance, it took about 81 Russian rubles to buy $1 on 24th of Feb. That is the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. Just a couple of weeks later during the war, it had almost slipped to half of the value. That is, you then needed 151 rubles to buy $1. But then, all of a sudden, the Russian ruble started to become pretty strong and reached the initial level once again. It is close to 81 rubles per dollar mark once again. This is why the entire world is surprised as why has it happened and how has Russia managed to do this. Now there are multiple steps taken by Russia and the Russian banks in order to ensure that their currency becomes strong once again. For example, the Bank of Russia ordered the Russian energy exporters that if they have US dollars, they should exchange their 80% of US dollars to purchase ruble. Now what will be the impact of it? All of a sudden, if the energy companies go to market and say we want to buy ruble, means the demand of ruble will increase. When the demand of ruble will increase, automatically the price of ruble will also become stronger. See, the price of any currency is dependent on the supply and demand chain. Simple. If the currency is much more in demand, the price of that currency will automatically becomes more. So you have to pay more money for that. Because the Russian energy company started buying ruble from the market, they increased the market price of ruble, and that is how ruble became stronger. Not just this, the foreigners in Russia were also not allowed to sell their assets in Russia. That is also one of the ways that the Russian bank tried to control value of ruble in the country. There were multiple other steps also taken. That is, a Russian central bank, for example, raised the interest rate to 20% to invite foreign investment into their country as they tried to attract investors to increase the demand for their own ruble. And last but not the least, as per the Western media, the biggest contributor to the ruble strengthening is the ongoing peace talks between Ukraine and Russia that seem to be going in a positive direction in the past few days. This has also helped the ruble in coming back to the original level. However, despite all this, we must not assume that a recovery in ruble is equal to a strong Russian economy, because all the steps that the Russian banks have taken are not sustainable in the long run. For example, in the long run, they can't keep on offering 20% rate of interest. In the long run, the Russian energy export companies cannot keep on buying ruble in the market, because at the end of the day, the Russian central bank would have to have some foreign currency reserve so that they can buy commodities and goods from outside Russia. And that is when the real price of ruble will be seen in the market. So as per the experts, we'll have to wait for a couple of months or 3 months so that the dust settles down. Only then we will see the real price of ruble coming out. The Russian economy is no doubt much poorer as compared to what it was earlier, because foreign businesses have exited. Many big energy companies from UK, etc. have also broken their agreements with the Russian companies, which will harm the Russian economy in the long run. So just because their ruble is going back into the recovery mode doesn't mean that the Russian economy is also in the recovery mode. Because at the end of the day, you need to have foreign currency such as dollar or euros or pounds in order to remain internationally relevant. Now, just to give you a graph to show what exactly was the level of ruble when the war started and how has it recovered now. As you can see, the day that the war had started, that is 24th of Feb, the Russian ruble was somewhere in the vicinity of 80 to 81. A couple of weeks later, it touched a low point of 120 rubles and in fact went down even further. Now, if you have a confusion of why did the article mention 151 rubles per dollar and why is this graph only showing us 120 ruble per dollar at the worst point, that is because if you see, this graph is made by Bank of Russia. So Bank of Russia, despite the ruble becoming extremely weak, did not really want to show that their ruble is almost half of the value. So even at the worst time, they did not really show the real picture of ruble. In the international market, you had to give 151 ruble to buy a dollar, but Bank of Russia was still suggesting that 120, 121 is still our level. Anyway, the recovery of ruble can be seen by countries across the world here. These were the articles we wanted to discuss on the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number 1. With a shared history, culture and society, there shouldn't be many reasons for India and Nepal to not have cordial relations. Discuss. Second, The rise in retail prices of fuel in India is as much because of the complicated pricing structure as it is because of rising global prices of crude oil. Do you agree? Both the questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.